Welcome back to the Perfectly Homeless podcast. We're continuing with the State Homeless Score Project. No procrastinating. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, I'm a huge procrastinator, Karen O. I didn't get my birthmark until I was like 11 years old.
Well, speaking of arriving incredibly late to the party, Rhode Island's state bureaucracy has been doing, some major procrastinating of its own, especially when it comes to keeping people alive this winter.
Yeah, that is a very fair point, and it perfectly sets the stage for what we're looking at today.
Right.
So if you're just joining us, you are part of a mission. We are evaluating Rhode Island's lived reality for the unhoused, and we're going to build a scoring system for the state right here in real time.
Exactly. It's a documentary-style exploration.
Yeah, we want to look right past the glowing press releases and dig into the actual physical systems governing the streets. Now, I do want to ask you to be patient as you listen, because the score will dynamically evolve throughout our discussion today.
We're basically building it piece by piece, seeing how all these different systems collide. Right. So let's start with the big picture. We just got our hands on the data from the state's January 2025 point-in-time count.
And at first glance, if you just read the headline, you'd probably think it's time to celebrate.
Oh, totally. The total unhoused population in Rhode Island is 2,373 people. That's a 2.8% decrease from 2024. And get this, it's the very first time that overall number has dropped since, way back in 2019.
Right. It absolutely sounds like a victory on paper. But, when you look at the lived reality behind those spreadsheets, there's a crucial, frankly chilling caveat hidden in that data.
What do you mean?
Well, yes, the total number of unhoused individuals dropped slightly. However, the unsheltered population, meaning people who are literally living out on the concrete, sleeping in their cars, or sheltering in abandoned buildings, that number actually rose by over 15%.
Wow. Wait, a 15% increase for the unsheltered?
Yeah. We are now looking at 618 human beings entirely without shelter. And to make matters worse, 1,022 of those surveyed are considered chronically homeless.
And chronically homeless means they've been unhoused for over a year, right? Usually dealing with overlapping challenges like mental health hurdles or substance disorders.
Exactly. The system has failed them not just once, but chronically over a long period of time.
It's like squeezing a balloon. The state is celebrating because the total volume inside the balloon might look slightly smaller, but in reality, they're just displacing the air.
That's a great way to put it.
The pressure in the most vulnerable spots out on the street is dangerously high. And we have to talk about the physical conditions when this data was collected. This wasn't some balmy spring afternoon.
Far from it. Volunteers actually went out on the night of January 27th to physically find and count people. And the temperature that night in Providence hovered around 18 degrees.
Oh, man. That is freezing.
Right. And when it's that cold, people hide deeper to stay warm. So that 618 number is likely a big undercount. But that's the physical reality we are evaluating today. Human beings trying to survive an 18-degree night.
Yeah. So with that baseline established, let's start building our scorecard with our first category, housing affordability.
Okay, let's get into it.
Because the state is struggling to lower those chronic numbers, we first have to look at whether people can actually afford a roof. On the systemic level, the state just awarded $7.5 million to boost homeownership, and they successfully added 37 permanent supportive housing units. They've also brought in some heavy hitters. The Executive Office of Housing, the EOH, just hired a massive consulting firm called Alvarez & Marsal.
What's fascinating here is how the state is attempting to use data-driven consulting to stretch their expiring pandemic resources.
Yeah.
Alvarez & Marsal isn't a housing developer.
Wait, really? Who are they?
They're a global management consulting firm, like the kind of people you bring in to turn around a failing Fortune 500 company.
Okay, wow. Okay, so why are they mapping homelessness?
Because from the state's perspective, this is a complex corporate efficiency problem. The EOH realized a massive chunk of the state budget is being eaten up by emergency room visits and crisis care for the chronically unhoused.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So Alvarez & Marsal was brought in to map every single statewide resource, identify cost efficiencies, and this is the real goal, look at ways to unlock federal Medicaid funding by legally proving that providing housing acts as a healthcare intervention.
Which makes total sense on a spreadsheet. I get the logic.
Sure.
But then you look at the actual output versus the immediate need. The state added 37 new supportive housing units, 37. And we just established there are 1,022 chronically homeless individuals on the street right now.
The math is just brutal.
Yeah. The gap between these high-level corporate mapping phases and the availability of actual physical affordable units is just overwhelming. Like, maps don't keep the rain off your head. So this lowers the overall picture for the state.
It really does. The math simply doesn't add up for the people standing out in the cold. And because the state is failing to build enough permanent roofs, the pressure entirely shifts to temporary survival.
Which brings us to category 2, shelter access.
And the situation here is equally grim.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Rhode Island actually lost 71 emergency shelter beds in 2025, dropping their total capacity down to 1,826.
And we should probably explain why those bids were lost. It wasn't necessarily some malicious cut. It was the result of expiring federal COVID-era funds.
Right.
When that pandemic money dried up, the temporary shelter spaces leased out in hotels or community centers just had to shut down.
But it's not just about losing old beds, it's about failing to open new ones. We have to talk about Echo Village because nothing illustrates the systemic failure better.
Yeah, that was a tragedy.
It was supposed to be this community of 45 pallet shelters located off Route 146 in Providence, like a genuine potential lifeline.
It was. But those 45 pallet shelters sat completely empty for an entire year. And the reason literally comes down to a bureaucratic mismatch.
Wait, really? A mismatch?
Yeah. Pallet shelters are essentially highly insulated modular cabins, but Rhode Island's state fire and building codes didn't have a classification for them. They aren't permanent residential structures, but they also aren't tents. The regulatory framework simply didn't know what to do with them, so they were paralyzed in red tape.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have a well-documented crisis. We have 618 people living completely unsheltered.
Yeah.
We have 45 physical shelters sitting right there on Route 146, completely built, and they're kept locked and empty during an 18-degree January freeze because an inspector couldn't find the right checkbox on a clipboard.
I know, it sounds crazy. To provide some objective context here, there was immense pressure from advocates for Governor McKee to declare a formal state of emergency over the winter.
And did he?
No, he resisted those calls. His administration's rationale was that an emergency declaration wouldn't actually unlock any new federal funds. Plus, relaxing the safety codes could create severe regulatory and safety liabilities if a fire broke out inside those temporary units.
I mean, I understand the fear of liability, I really do. The optics of a fire would be terrible. But for the person sleeping on the frozen concrete in January, a theoretical liability is a pretty abstract concept compared to immediate physical frostbite.
Exactly.
They completely missed the most brutal part of the winter, opening on February 11th. So this lowers the overall picture for the state significantly.
It's a harsh reality.
Yeah.
And when there aren't enough affordable units and there aren't enough shelter beds, people are inevitably forced into public spaces.
Which brings us to category 3, criminalization and enforcement.
Right. And this is where Rhode Island's legal framework gets incredibly complex.
Yeah.
Because back in 2012, Rhode Island actually made history. They were the very first state in the nation to pass a homeless Bill of Rights.
And if you read it, it is a remarkably progressive piece of legislation.
It really is.
It explicitly protects the right to use public spaces, sidewalks, parks, just like anyone else. A police officer can't just walk up and tell you to move along solely because of your housing status. And crucially, it extends Fourth Amendment privacy protections to personal belongings.
That Fourth Amendment piece is massive. It means your backpack or your tent is protected from arbitrary search and seizure as if it were a brick-and-mortar house.
That's amazing.
Yeah, an officer cannot just unzip your tent and look inside without probable cause or warrant. In 2012, that was radical.
But of course, there's always a but. We have to juxtapose that foundational 2012 law with a brand new piece of legislation, Senate Bill 3298, which goes into effect in October 2026.
Right, the new sweep law.
Yeah, it establishes a formal statewide procedure for the forcible removal of encampments on public property. The law states that the removing agency has to provide a 20-day written notice posted directly on the encampment before they clear it out.
Now, on the surface, 20 days sounds like a reasonable compromise to allow social workers to interface with the encampment.
Wait, a 20-day notice sounds great on paper, but knowing how local politics operate, I have to imagine there are loopholes for a city to bypass that completely. I mean, a mayor isn't just going to let an encampment sit on a busy commercial downtown sidewalk for 3 weeks.
Your intuition is entirely correct.
Yeah.
There are massive exceptions written right into the new law.
I figured. Like what?
If that encampment is in a state or federal right-of-way, near an active construction site, near environmental hazards, or, and this is the big broad one, if there's an immediate documented public safety or health concern, The 20-day notice is completely waived.
Wow. So they can just bulldoze it instantly.
Yes, the encampment can be cleared immediately. So this raises an important question. How do you actually balance a foundational right to public space with immediate public safety removals?
It's a profound friction between progressive ideals and strict localized enforcement. And because of that deep friction, this shifts the score in a complicated way.
It does.
And actually, that brings us right to our midpoint. If you are watching our video feed, you'll see we are pulling up the preliminary score overlay on screen right now.
There it is.
I want to be very clear, this is strictly our draft score. Based on this, the current draft score is a D+ green.
And we must emphasize that this is strictly preliminary. The first half of our evaluation focused heavily on the systemic side, housing availability, shelter bureaucracy. But the remaining categories focus on the day-to-day mechanics of survival on the ground. How do people navigate the world when the systems fail? Those factors could significantly change this final outcome.
So let's keep going. Let's say you've been swept from an encampment, but you have a car. We're on category 4, vehicle dwelling friendliness.
Okay.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the difference between city law and state law in Rhode Island is wild. Let's look at Providence. Overnight, parking on residential streets is strictly banned from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. unless you have a paid permit.
And those permits aren't just handed out. It's $100 a year if the car is registered in Providence and $200 if it's registered out of state.
And if you happen to be a university student living in dorms, you aren't eligible at all.
All right. Plus, you can't have any unpaid tickets. So for an unhoused person living in their vehicle, obtaining that permit is a nearly impossible financial and bureaucratic hurdle.
On top of that, state law actually requires every single inch of snow and ice to be cleared from your vehicle before driving. That includes the roof, hood, and windows.
Yeah, imagine you're living in a high-top conversion van during a New England blizzard, trying to physically clear the roof of that van from the outside while freezing is a massive hurdle just to avoid getting a ticket.
It creates a scenario where existing in a vehicle in a city is a constant game of cat and mouse. But then we look at the state's highway infrastructure.
This is the crazy part.
Yeah, according to resources like the Boondockers Bible, which tracks these laws, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation operates 4 specific highway rest areas. And interestingly, the state has not adopted any maximum time limits for parking there.
Meaning, legally speaking, you can park overnight or for several nights at these rest areas. There are no signs prohibiting overnight stays.
As long as you stay with your vehicle and you don't pitch a tent on the grass, you are legally allowed to rest there indefinitely.
It's a striking irony. The safest, most legally protected place for a vehicle dweller to exist in Rhode Island isn't tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. It's resting indefinitely on the shoulder of a high-speed interstate highway.
It's absurd when you really picture it, but it is a legal safe haven. And because that rest area loophole provides a legitimate, unharassed place to park when all the shelters are full, this raises the overall picture for the state.
But obviously, staying in a car at a rest stop isn't a long-term solution. Which brings us to the next category, outreach and social services.
Right. How is Rhode Island actively supporting people stuck out on the streets?
Actually, there are some really strong, practical initiatives happening here. The Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness runs a free homeless legal clinic twice a month.
Oh, that's cool. What do they do?
They help unhoused individuals navigate complex administrative barriers. We're talking about things like divorce paperwork, outstanding child support issues, or replacing lost IDs.
And we should explain why that matters so much. If you don't have a valid ID, or if you have thousands of dollars in unresolved child support, you can be instantly disqualified from affordable housing lotteries.
Exactly. That administrative support is just as critical as handing out a warm coat.
Yeah, totally. You also have nonprofits like the House of Hope running incredible boots-on-the-ground programs. They do consistent street outreach and operate a mobile program called Shower to Empower.
Providing basic hygiene dignity. It's so important.
But the most structurally significant initiative is happening at the state government level. The EOH and the Department of Corrections have formed a joint work group specifically targeting recidivism.
Right, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where that Alvarez and Marsal data mapping actually pays off.
Really? How so?
Well, the state recognized through the data that people leaving the prison system who experience housing insecurity have vastly higher recidivism rates. They end up right back in a cell.
Ah, I
So
see.
these two agencies are finally sharing data to create a pilot program that intercepts people before they hit the street. They're
Well,
trying to fix the pipeline of homelessness right at one of its major sources.
that's proactive instead of reactive. Because of the tangible strength of these legal clinics and this cross-agency data sharing, this raises the overall picture significantly.
Which finally brings us to our last evaluation metric, pathways to permanent housing.
So, what does this all mean for the end game? How do people actually escape the cycle?
Well, right now, the state is heavily focused on mapping its future. The EOH recently issued an RFP, a request for proposals, to develop a brand new, comprehensive statewide strategic plan to end homelessness. They want to align the Interagency Council on Homelessness, local nonprofits, and a continuum of care all into one cohesive strategy.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, the continuum of care is basically the regional network that applies for and distributes federal housing dollars from HUD, right?
Exactly. Getting them aligned with state government is crucial.
And to be fair, we also saw some tiny glimmers of hope in the recent data. Transitional housing beds ticked up slightly by exactly 3 beds.
3 beds, better than nothing, I guess.
True. But more importantly, family unsheltered homelessness dropped to absolute zero. Not a single family with children was found sleeping outside during the 18-degree count.
Now that is a remarkable achievement. It proves that when the system prioritizes a specific demographic, it can successfully shelter them. However, we have to look at the overall momentum of the state's approach.
Right. Honestly, looking at their strategy, it feels like hiring an expensive architect to completely redesign your kitchen while the house is actively on fire.
That's exactly what it is.
They're issuing RFPs, writing massive strategic plans, and paying corporate consultants, but they're doing all of this while the federal pandemic money is drying up fast and 1,022 people are chronically stuck on the street.
This is where I want to ask you, the listener, a direct question. What stands out to you in all of this? Is a robust, newly commissioned strategic plan enough to hang your hat on when hundreds of people are facing frostbite today?
It's the ultimate tension between future planning and present suffering. And because of that tension, this shifts the score one last time.
So we've analyzed the entire landscape, from the high-level consulting down to the highway rest stops. Let's pull all of this together for the final evaluation.
Let's do it. Summarizing this documentary exploration, Rhode Island has some distinct major strengths. The historic 2012 Homeless Bill of Rights is a foundational piece of progressive legislation. The DOT rest area loophole provides a vital legal lifeline for vehicle dwellers. And achieving zero unsheltered families is a major, undeniable milestone.
But the weaknesses are severe and immediate. A net loss of emergency shelter beds, the infuriating delays keeping Echo Village empty during a freezing winter, and an alarming 15% rise in the chronically unhoused street population.
So let's talk about the final grades for the state of Rhode Island. For the housing affordability category, the severe lack of available physical units earns them a D.
And for shelter access, losing existing beds while failing to navigate their own fire codes for the pallet shelters results in a D+ rate.
For criminalization and enforcement, trying to balance those progressive 2012 rights with the new, stricter encampment sweep laws earns them a B.
For vehicle dwelling friendliness, the harsh city rules are offset by that rest area lifeline, pulling the grade up to a B.
For outreach and social services, the excellent cross-agency work between housing and corrections earns a solid B+5.
And finally, for pathways to permanent housing, the state's heavy reliance on future strategic planning over immediate placement earns a C.
So when we aggregate all of these metrics, the final perfectly homeless state score for Rhode Island is a solid C.
A grade of C perfectly encapsulates Rhode Island's current reality. The state has incredibly progressive foundational rights, and they are implementing excellent data-driven social service outreach.
Yeah.
But right now, they're fundamentally failing at the sheer logistical math. They're struggling to keep enough emergency shelter beds open, and they're getting tangled in their own building codes, which literally leaves people out in the freezing cold while consultants map the resources.
It is a state with a very big heart, but a suffocating amount of red tape.
Exactly. I want to leave you with one final thread to pull on, something to mull over after we sign off. Over the next year, the remaining federal pandemic funds are going to completely vanish. As that financial cliff rapidly approaches, will Rhode Island's heavy reliance on expensive corporate consulting firms and strategic mapping translate into actual physical roofs? Or will the state simply become much, much better at counting the people it leaves out in the cold?
That's the perfectly homeless state score for Rhode Island. Thank you for tuning in, Treat. If you find this series interesting, please tap the like and subscribe buttons, and we will see you in the next state. PTW Peen, don't forget to walk the dog.
If you'd like to support the project, click on over to the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and get yourself a warm hoodie with our logo, or you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/perfectlyhomeless. Every purchase and donation helps fund future episodes in this 50-state journey through homelessness in America. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next episode.